So we started about 2 years ago,
Okay.
where we wanted to answer the question of how the exponential digital technology evolution
Yes.
is going to affect people in developing countries,
Yeah.
especially from the perspective of how is it going to affect the poor,
Yes.
marginalized communities. Is it an opportunity or is it a challenge?
Yeah.
Um, at that time, we were more worried about, what is the effect of AI and all of these kinds of things. People are losing their jobs, what it's going to do. But we realized that over the last 2 years, that wasn't the right thing to worry about.
Yes.
What is really more important is to start a dialogue under the premise that the digital economy is here. The question now becomes, how do we make use of it in the best way to think about inclusivity and inequality first. Use inclusivity, address inequality first, and what are the implications of this? How do we start the discussion? Who do we need to bring together? And
Okay.
what are some of the experiences that we've seen across all developing economies? From the African perspective, I think that there are two very important pieces. The first one to me is this notion of having a multi-stakeholder conversation, which means we need to get the civil societies, we need to get the government and the private sector to start talking about very specifically how do we address inclusion using the tools of the digital economy. This is very different from what you typically know from PPP. PPPs are it's a very transactional idea. Here's somebody who brings funding, here's a private sector that will deliver, here's the government. The PPP is always a very financially oriented, transactional. This is a discussion that we need to start where we have a compact, as we call it, across these different stakeholders that say our national digital strategy is this, and inclusion is a first-class principle. It comes first, and that puts the people who are affected from digital transformation at the center of the debate. I moved here end of 2012. That's when I started the IBM Research Lab in Nairobi, and I met with a lot of startups and a lot of people there in those days. When I compare this to now, I would say there's a tremendous maturity in the ecosystem. There is there's a critical mass, right? There's a lot of startups that are that have figured out their ways in positioning themselves. The capital challenge is still there, but it's also becoming better in some ways, and there will be new models of raising capital. But I think compared to over the last 7 years, I mean, it's like day and night. A lot of things have changed. A lot of maturity has come in. A lot of good people are here. I think is there more to do, of course, but I think it's a very different scene today than it was 7 years ago. Kenya has, by the way, like so many other African countries, there is a tremendous human capital in this country. It is already a country where the education levels are actually relatively high. Um, what happens after school needs to be addressed, right? And this is not about universities, because universities are universities, but this is really about how do we create professions, right? How do we teach? How do we create setups for technical vocation? How do we use ICT in those segments right away, right? So that when a plumber learns how to do plumbing, they're already getting exposed to technical tools that will teach them the theoretical parts of plumbing, that will give them 3D visuals. I was just reviewing some work that a group, Step Innovation in Kenya, is doing. And it's a company in Kenya that's also done some work in India. It's amazing what you can do. But think about the impact of improving technical vocational education training. It's massive. And when you look at the big four, I mean, what do we need to do in construction? Well, we need to hire more quality workers so that we don't have to import them, right? What do we need to do in tourism? We need to get people into the services industry that actually know. that Kenya is already a services industry, right?
Yeah.
That they can blow people away so that they will come over and over again. So all of these things will have tremendous impact. And I think that's where investments need to go in. As long as you embed sort of digital skills in that at the same time, you will see a step change. What what does it mean if the domestic e-commerce players are not selling enough or not reaching enough in the population? It means that whatever they're selling at whatever price they're selling is not meaningful to the customers. So think about it. The technology is there. You can do it online. A lot of people in Kenya are online, right? 50% of the population has smartphones. There's no reason why they shouldn't. But apparently, the service that they're offering is not providing the value that customers want. So, in e-commerce in Kenya, as far as I'm concerned, we're in a phase of experimentation. We haven't figured out what works. Right? And then there are some smaller companies who I think have a better view than the larger ones, right? Like Sky Garden and some others who but I think we need to experiment more. We cannot always say, oh yeah, maybe there are some regulatory changes, maybe there are some VAT issues and all that. Okay, make a case to the government and say, if you reduce my VAT in half, or if you get rid away of taxes, I will include 60% instead of 5%. Prove it, right? Those things are debate to have, but to just say, the regulatory environment doesn't allow me to do this. No, you're selling something that customers don't want to buy at the prices that you're offering. Solve that problem first. You have to think about, if you have established players, then you should think a little bit about, what the right model of taxation is. Whether the current one in the finance bill is the right one or not, I don't know. I'm not a tax expert. However, when you start out and you haven't made sufficient revenue yet, where every dollar counts, and I run a startup, I know exactly, right? So for me to pay 2,000 euros or whatever in taxes, that's a lot of money, right? It wouldn't be so much money if I had already $1 million business, but I don't, right? So you have to protect what's happening in the beginning and not burden people with taxes and all that. And then you can have that conversation when it's actually fair for people to pay taxes. So I think that this is actually, towards what we are proposing in the pathways work. Look, it's so important to form the right teams that can come together to say, here is how we are going to create a sandbox. Here's how we're going to protect you for real. Right, here are the key performance indicators. How much revenue are you making? How much investment are you attracting? I want, as the government, to protect you and allow you to work, right? And then you break this down by regulatory authorities. I think the CMA here in Kenya had started this a while ago by creating regulatory authorities in the capital market. Sandboxes in the capital market. There are some other efforts. But I think if we standardize this, and if the government says, okay, in these different verticals, we will create sandboxes, and anyone who doesn't meet these criteria, you are free of tax, right? You don't have to pay the tax. And if you can do this, and here I think they've introduced a little bit like this with on the tax, no, even in Kenya now with the digital tax and all that. I didn't fully understand it, right? But it's not clear. I think there just needs to be a perspective of saying, go, show that it's valuable. If I say to you, once you reach $1 million in revenue, I will tax you. Make that part of your business plan. Like, don't come back and says, oh, I all of a sudden got taxed. We already told you. It needs to show up in your business plan that you will have a profit decline at that part, right? Because we will tax you. It's something you can work with, right? Versus taking even the little that I make and accounting for tax. We have a talent mismatch. So you have to always look at who's saying that, right? If the private sector says that the universities are not producing sufficiently people that can work as engaged employees, okay, we can talk about that. We can have the universities work out if they really, create future engaged employees. But my take is that education has changed dramatically, or should change dramatically, because the nature of jobs is changing dramatically. I wouldn't bet on the educational sector quickly adopt to that. I think you have to find new ways of teaching people, right, that need to be more practical. I give you one example. Um, I teach in Germany at a University of Applied Sciences. So it's not a traditional university, but it's a private university of applied sciences that is accredited by the German government. And the focus is to produce people who will be working in specific jobs in the private sector. And our job as professors is to prepare them for the real world job. So even if I teach them computer science or big data or whatever, I will teach them this in such a way that when they go on the job, they have heard about the challenges first, right? And we need to have similar concepts here in Kenya as well, down to, as I said, down to vocational training. Whether you want to be a mason, whether you want to be a plumber or a construction worker. And going with that, and that's my final point, the government needs to start giving out accreditations in all of these fields that will become an employment requirement. Right? And unfortunately, government has started this conversation here at the programmer level. I think that's not the problem. The bigger risk is, the plumbers, and yeah, it's because for them it becomes a way to expand your horizon, right? To actually gain employability. There are always two sides, right? The one is given that right now most of the venture capitalists are not domestic. It's very hard when you're on the outside to judge to do the due diligence in Africa, right? Because you don't necessarily know the market. Only thing that you know, it's a growth market, so you want to put money in there. But it's very hard. So that's an easier to solve problem because there are also now VCs here who are not located here, hire people from the local community. The other thing is to understand the role of donor and philanthropic organizations, whether they can be an aggregator, and so they have typically a better tie-in to the local communities. But can they be, instead of directly giving a grant, can they create a venture model that aggregates, thereby de-risks the investors, but also gets more capital into the country? So there are some innovations that are required on the capital flow front, which I think we will see soon. So giving women access in the same way as men have access, whether it's to smartphones, etc., etc. So that's kind of at a very basic level. But then the other thing is also to create, especially in the professional environments, to create safe spaces where women can actually learn without having to face stereotypes, right? I mean, to focus on the education of women, right? To support those women who are already driving businesses, right? You have to be intentional about this. And I think especially technology can have a pretty significant impact. When I'm hopeful, then I think we will include digital tools much more in the lowest levels of education. That will give people something to do with the internet. Then the second thing that I think will be is that I think people will take the digital strategy, inclusive digital strategy, seriously. And the third change that I think will happen is that because the markets will open up and integrate more, especially here in sub-Saharan Africa, you will see that digital services will scale much better and become much more tradable within the East African community and the total sub-Saharan African community. And that, I think, will be a point in time where we really need to ask ourselves the question, as we move from here to there, have we marginalized people more or not? Right? And I hope that what we are proposing is that think about this today so that you don't have an issue later.
Tomorrow.